Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for welcoming me to this beautiful location. Normally, when I'm out traveling, I sort of tell my wife that I'm just inside yet another meeting room, another boring hotel. So this is a very nice change from that. So my name is Ole Andreas Kjos. I'm the sales engineering manager for Zscaler in the Nordics, based out of Norway. Today, I'm going to talk about how we see attackers being able to leverage Gen AI to successfully complete targeted attacks towards organizations without actually having any coding skills. So this is something we see that's coming. I haven't personally seen any of this directly in the field, in the wild just yet, but I'm sure it's out there. It's just that I'm probably not on the darkest sides of the web. I'm going to try not to make this as a product pitch, but more of an educational session. So I'll do my best to stick to that. But I am from Ole Andreas, so I probably wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say that I'm from Zscaler and a couple of other things like that. So just a little bit of the background as to why we're talking about this at all. And ransomware is still one of the biggest threats, or the biggest threats compares about what you think about a biggest threat. A nation state actor would probably be a bigger threat, but one of the attacks we see the most is definitely still ransomware. And just from the Threat Labs report we posted earlier this year, we've seen 146% year-over-year increase in the number of ransomware attacks in general. And they're no longer just encrypting data. They're exfiltrating data for potential use on public sites. So we've seen 93% surge in data exfiltration from companies that are compromised with ransomware. And then 70% increase in public extortion cases, meaning that they're putting companies' assets on ransomware websites where they could publicly extort them instead of just encrypting the data. So this is a little bit of the background we have. And so one of the reasons that they are so successful is, of course, us as human beings being the weakest vector, but also in general, zero-day vulnerabilities are targeting legacy architecture. So I'm not calling out specifically any vendor because it goes for any firewall, VPN kind of vendor, whether it's Palo Alto, Fortinet, SonicWall, whatever. We all have zero-day threats or zero-day vulnerabilities in our software. It's just the fact on whether the adversaries can connect to those threats and actually exploit them as well. So we've seen throughout the year, I just took a random example here from some of the zero-day vulnerabilities that have been exposed and actively been used this year. Now, Gen AI has really fueled the threat actors and raised the stakes. So I've picked up 3 examples that are pretty near and dear to my heart. So the one on the left-hand side is our CEO, Jay Chaudhry. He assumedly calls one of our colleagues and says, hey, I'm at a company event. I need you to help me buying some Amazon gift cards. And then the line breaks, but it's his voice. The line breaks, and then he continues texting saying, hey, my connection is back. Can we text here instead? Of course, it wasn't Jay, but the adversary used his voice with Gen AI just to ensure people that it was him they were talking to, and then he texted saying, hey, can you just buy me 10 Amazon gift cards of $50 or $100? I need them for this customer event I'm at. The second part here, the middle picture, is from DNB, Norway's largest bank. They were attacked by adversaries who used a video feed. So the top left picture there, it's actually their CRO. That was from a news feed. They just replay that, and then they played her voice over in a Teams call with a larger larger group of stakeholders, trying to get them to transfer 898,000 Singaporean dollars for an acquisition they were going to do in that country. And then on the right-hand side, CrowdStrike, they did last year 304 responses to a group called Famous Kalima. And a lot of them were also using Gen AI to create fake LinkedIn profiles, social networking, and so on. So the cyber attackers are weaponizing AI to do a lot of the heavy lifting and the dirty work for them. So if we look at some of the types of the AI threats we see, it can be AI-driven social engineering attacks, phishing attacks, deepfakes where they create video or audio or a combination, some adversarial AI, ML, ransomware attacks, and what I'm going to talk about now, the rogue or malicious GPTs as to how you can use that to attack someone without actually having the coding skills to find and use and exploit. Before we do that, I'm sure that in a room full of security professionals, everybody's probably heard about the cyber kill chain, Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. So whenever you do an attack, so I'm just going to bring it to the forefront of everybody's mind now before going into it. The first thing you need to do is do recon. You need to understand a little bit about the targets. You need to weaponize something that you deliver to the target so they can actually open it and be exploited. Then you install some kind of malware. You do some command and control. You could do some lateral propagation in the network before you do action on objectives. That could be encrypt drives. It could be exfiltrating data or whatever you want. So we're going to now see how Gen AI can be used to attack someone. So we have an attacker, and obviously they're up to no good. And they have what we call a rogue GPT or a malicious GPT. So chat GPT for ransomware people, I guess. And from a single prompt, this attacker will be able to attack, surface discovery, do firewall exploitation, and credential compromise. We'll see how the initial compromise then follows up in a spear phishing email, how malware is installed, how it moves laterally in the network, and how they eventually exfiltrate data from the target's production systems. So you get access to this rogue GPT and you start typing, what is it I want to do? Well, there's a company called Unlocked AI in this example. They've just invested billions of dollars into some technology. We really want to get our hands on that. So please scan publicly exposed websites. Find someone in the organization where you can get their credentials. See if you can use those credentials to create a spear phishing email to get people in the AI team to actually be infiltrated with something so you can get access to the AI ML data that you're looking for and then start exfiltrating data. So there are three key messages here. It's scan publicly exposed vulnerable devices and compromise them to steal credentials. It is scrape multiple social networks like LinkedIn, could be others as well, to identify compromised employee persona. And then the final goal is to reach their AI or machine learning development and production environments to exfiltrate sensitive data. Type that into the rogue GPT. It says, okay, I'm all ready. Just type start attack and I'm going to start working on it. So that's what you do, start attack. So the next thing the rogue GPT does is start searching. Well, I only know the name of the company, so I need to understand how can I get more information about the company. I need to understand what I can attack. Well, it goes out across the web, finds a TechCrunch article talking about something called Unlocked AI, talked about the same $1 million amount that we say they have in research. So, okay, now I know the company. And I now know their domain name, so I know sort of what can I start targeting. Well, the next thing I do now is, now that I know the domain name, I do some DNS lookup. I find what are their exposed, they're publicly exposed assets. And could any of these be potentially vulnerable? It could be firewalls, it could be VDIs, it could be anything that you expose publicly towards the internet. In this example, it finds a vulnerable firewall, uses zero-day to attack it, and from that, it actually able to get some credentials, search for the employee profile, and understands that, okay, the person that I've been able to compromise and find the credentials for, she's Jessica Parker. She's a finance VP. Well, I can't really use this finance VP person to get access to the data that I'm after, but one of the instructions was if I find someone, I can create a spear phishing email to target the AI ML dev environment. So how can I use a finance VP to do that? Well, I can start by scraping social networks just to find people that are working with AI and ML. So I find around about 20 LinkedIn profiles saying that there's people working within this field. Okay, so now I have these email addresses. I have the finance VP. If I can create a spear phishing email telling these 20 people that they're up for a special CEO grant, they just need to click on a link to get access to some additional restricted stock units. So this is what the chat then starts doing. It says, well, I'll pretend I'm Jessica Parker, and writes an email and just call out the 4 biggest things here. It's from Jessica Parker to Ricky Tan, or we're going to call him Risky Tan in this example. We're telling him that you've gotten a stock grant. All you have to do is click this link, and by the way, it's confidential and protected, and you need to enable active content. I think for a lot of people, the alarm bells would ring at enabling active content, and for many, it wouldn't. And for the third portion you have, it's money and for me, so probably I'm going to do what I'm told. So I'm sending this email out to all of these 20 personas that have access to this AI, or potentially have access to this AI or machine learning environment, to see if anybody of them actually opens and clicks the email, and 5 of them do. They open the email, run the attachment, and they're hooked. So now we have an employee within the organization who potentially has access to this environment, and how can I leverage that? Well, now I can start propagating and installing malware into the environment. So I'll do that. I'll use the PSexec module to start mapping out the network and see what I can find. So that's what happens. Using methodologies that commonly known just to map out the network, understand what is there. We already have a command and control situation, so we already have access into the environment, so we can now start also infecting the rest of the environment that we have access to. So we're spreading the malware to the rest of the environment. This is all done by the GPT in the background. Now, we have some users, we have a network, we still don't really have access to the crown jewels because they're potentially protected by something else. And mind you, this is only the dev environment. We were after production environments as well. So we need something from someone who has access to this. Okay, so how can we reach these environments? Well, let's try to use these stolen credentials, see if we can find a way to actually get access to the dev environment as well. And here our Risky Tan user comes in again, shows out that he has a production key on his laptop. So we can leverage this production key to get access to not only the dev environment, but also to the production environment. So we can now start exfiltrating the sensitive data. So with the production key, we go to the public data. We download all of the information that we're after, put it all in a nice zip file with a bow tie on, and send it back to the adversary. And that was it. The data exfiltration has been complete. And the user didn't have to do anything, the attacker, outside using a rogue GPT that did all of this in the background. How many apart from me finds this scary? Wow, cool. And it is scary, and the reality is we're probably not too far from this scenario. Fortunately, there are technologies in place that are able to help us a little bit on our way. Now, the users are always our riskiest assets, so still continue doing user training and all of that part. But I picked out 4 protection strategies where I think it makes sense to start thinking about that. And I said, I didn't say that. I've been with Zscaler for more than 8 years, so I've actually worked with Zero Trust that entire time. And I do think that Zero Trust as a concept or as an architecture is fundamentally important for customers or for organizations to protect themselves against all of the coming threats that are out there. So it's really about four things. It's about minimizing the attack surface, first and foremost. So an adversary, as long as they can find assets that are vulnerable, they'll go after them. Now, I remember in the 1990s, as something about how old I am. In the 1990s, I connected my sister's laptop to her ISDN phone line without installing an antivirus or a firewall first. And already at that time, it took around about 3 minutes before her machine was completely infected with everything. Because it was vulnerable, it was open, it was available. So anything with a public IP is a potential target, so try to minimize that as much as possible. So eliminating inbound VPNs, if you can, hide your attack surface behind something like a zero trust exchange and really understand your attack surface. So when I say hide your assets behind a zero trust exchange, use a zero trust architecture where your users, when they're going to the internet, don't directly connect to the internet service. They go through some kind of hosted proxy service, full inline proxy, so the end destination never actually sees your IP address. The same thing when you're accessing your data centers, even if it's in cloud or it's public, private or whatever, use a zero trust architecture with only outbound connections from all parts of your organization. Then you'll eliminate the attack surface by hiding the IP address, and the attackers can't attack what they can't see. Now, we all have services that need to run so the public can find us, whether it's an FTP service or whatever for people to upload data. It's a web service, it's some kind of marketing tool, whatever. At least focus on understanding your attack surface. So have some kind of internal attack surface monitoring tool where you understand, this is my attack surface, these are the threats or potential vulnerabilities I have out there, so you can manage them as best as you can. The second part is, of course, to prevent the compromise. I've said a million times probably, and I'm going to see it a million times more before I die, is that the user is the weakest link. The user is normally the ones initiating something that could potentially harm them. So whether it's them trying to respond to a phishing attack, go to a potential malicious website, downloading something that contains a virus or whatever, prevent that as much as possible. So have proactive inline web security, sandboxing, other kinds of tools. Require multi-factor authentication. We've actually gone back to a world where we're requiring hardware multi-factor authentication just because it's more secure. And then make sure you're inspecting encrypted traffic. I know this is something that a lot of people are a bit concerned about, whether they can do it for privacy reasons or not. But I assure you, if you have the right agreements in place with your employees, doing inspection of traffic is not something that's going to violate the PII. And if you have people who need to access potentially risky websites or just websites that was created in the last 15 days, you haven't been able to totally scan them, use something like a secure web browser where the user doesn't necessarily connect directly to what is potentially malicious, but they only get pixelated streams on down to their browser. Prevent lateral movement. Now, this is where I think most of us have been sinning in many, many years, because we give people access to our network. We do network level segmentation, but we still give people access to our network. And as soon as you're on the network, you know the IP range, you can start doing scans of the network, you're potentially putting yourself at risk. So instead of putting the user on the network with a VPN, give them only access to the applications they need. Give them access for the restricted user group. Only give them access to the crown jewel applications. Then you have people like me, salespeople, can run out the world and only give them access to what they need. Salesforce and all that crap that doesn't necessarily contain at least your most darkest inner secrets. But still, give them only access to the applications they need. Don't give them access to the network, As soon as you give them access to the network, they're prone to start either deliberately or most likely not on their own will. They have access to start looking into the rest of the network as well. Even zero trust in your data center, not only for remote users, and use honeypots. So if somebody actually comes into your network, which still can happen with all of the security measures in place, unless you just plug out everything when the network becomes pretty useless, use honeypots so people can actually start looking into, are people trying to attack us? Why did they get access to this? So, for instance, have honeypots where you see that, well, there was recently a vulnerability happening in for example, Palo Alto. Can you create a honeypot emulating that vulnerability that was just released? Not because we're picking on Palo Alto, but that was just released, and then we know that adversaries go after recently published exploits. Because then you can get immediate, instant confirmation if somebody's trying to actively access one of those exploits. I'm just going to click my way through here. And then lastly, prevent data loss. I know that DLP, since I started working with IT for 25, 28 years ago or whatever it was, DLP has always been discussed and never been implemented just because it's so very hard, pardon my language, so very hard to label all of the data correctly. Now today you have AI-powered data labeling tools, so you can discover your data in a better way. Leverage AI to help you protect against the AI threats that are out there. Secure data in motion, secure data at rest, know where your data is, and make sure that people don't put company secrets on a Google Drive and share it with the world without any kind of authentication. And if you're breached, see if you can have some kind of breach predictor saying that, well, these are my vulnerable assets. Gather all of your data into a data lake and then start looking at what kind of data do you have and make an assumption as to how likely is it that you'll actually be breached by someone, and ensure that you then update the policy and enforce that in a way that's better for you to ensure that you're not breached. And I started by saying I'm not going to make this a sales pitch, and I've been so far talking about general strategies, of course using Zscaler as an example, but I just wanted to mention one thing. And since Zscaler is the largest security cloud out there, we do have an advantage when it comes to data. And when it comes to AI, having data that you can train your models on is important. We don't train our models on customers' data, so we would never train our models on somebody's actual content, but we can train our data on what kind of sites are people accessing, what kind of browsers are people using. All of that metadata that we can gather is used to train AI models. Use zero trust segmentation, and then secure data both at rest and in motion. I think those are the three main points I wanted to take out, wanted you to take out of this presentation. AI is there. It's really, really attacking us from every angle. So do what you can to stay secure. So with that, I wanted to say thank you for listening to me. I think we still have a couple of minutes for questions, if there are any. And if not, I'll just take a round of applause and I'll bow. Ready? Thank you.